Well, hey, it's time for stuff. You got yours. Oh, got yours. That's awesome. Perfect. So, well, tonight is module 10, and we are just literally in 1 Timothy 3, Titus chapter 1, and 1 Peter chapter 5. These are three sections that kind of outline the qualities and characteristics of New Testament leaders, elders, and deacons. And so this module just literally walks through every one of those qualities. Like, you'll be filling in the blanks, and it's just filling in a word from the verse or a thought from the verse that breaks down the qualities. Also in this, because when I originally wrote it, I used the NASB version just because it was so word for word oriented. The downside is some of the words are a little bit more archaic in comparison. You know, like pugnacious is not a word we typically throw around in everyday conversation. But it's also helpful to have some of that precision when we're looking at something like this. So that'll be the dominant version that gets used in this particular module and that kind of thing. And then really what you're going to see underneath everything is just kind of commentary. Right? So you can poke at that. I'll highlight a couple of different things that come out in that, but we'll do that. And then if you go toward the end, starting on page 118, there is a self-examination. This is truly a self-examination. So this doesn't get turned into me or anything else. It was just a tool that we developed a while back so that when a person, if they were looking at becoming an elder or a deacon, based on these qualities, they could go, I'm going to test myself, basically, you know. Now, for like eldership, we would ask a potential candidate, like, hey, when you took your self-evaluation, what were areas that you thought, hey, maybe I could grow in this, or maybe this is a weak spot in my life, whatever else. We wouldn't ask to see their results necessarily, but like if I look on page 125, husband of one wife, do I love my spouse with the sacrificial love that models Christ-like love for the church? Do I meet the special needs of my spouse in creative ways? Do I show a pattern of care or an interest of spiritual development for my spouse? So they could check those off or just kind of ask themselves the question. But if at the end they're like, yeah, I don't really do that with my wife. Then it's a good kind of warning thing for them to go like, oh, maybe that's an area to pay attention to. Now, in that too, we also know with the self-evaluation, sometimes we can be harder on ourselves, or we can assume that if I'm not perfect on all of these, then I'm not qualified to be a church leader. That's not the case either. We're all human and fallible and that kind of thing. But it's just sort of a device we established because we thought it kind of took some of these qualities that could maybe at times feel a little abstract, and we tried to kind of make them a little bit more, how do you practicalize some of these things? So the last 5 or 6 pages of this are just purely for you on your own if you just wanted to quiz yourself on your own life to be able to do that. So we won't get into those tonight, but it's back there. So I know, this one is a little thicker, and you're like, well, are we going to get through all of this tonight? Well, like I said, it only goes to page 117 pretty much, and then after that, it's just self-exam. So, all right, I'll pray, and then we'll get right to business. Jesus, I thank you again for tonight, and think about the people that aren't able to meet with us tonight, that as they're in different parts of the country, that things are going great for them, safe, everything else. And for those of us that are here, that we will really see these qualities, not simply as qualities for leaders, they're just qualities for people that follow you, Jesus. And I pray that we all long for these kinds of things to be true to us because we want to be wonderful examples of what it means to follow you in our world. And so may we all kind of learn from this and see the areas that we can even grow a little bit more, and then the places where we can take joy that those are strong features in our life. And so again, all the way around, we just thank you, and we look to you now in your good name. Amen. All right, page 105, up toward the top it says elders. And it starts off with the first thing there, an overseer, then you can fill in the blank with must be. Must be. And so Paul puts this participle in there that says these are qualities that must already be established and maintained. So it isn't like, hey, we're going to make you a leader and then you start working on these things, right? It's going to be that these are things that are true to your life, have been true to your life for a decent season of time, and therefore it's like I don't know if I love the word qualification as much as I love the word quality. Like, these are qualities of you as an individual. They've been proven qualities for a while, and therefore, because these are true of you, we're putting you in this position, right? Well, I bring that up in part. It's interesting as we're in this process of looking for a youth director right now. One of the things we bump into a little bit is young persons that are wanting to be the youth director, right? So it's kind of like, have you had enough life to prove that these qualities are anchored in you and you've had a haul with these qualities for a while? So like we had one guy, he was probably 23, but I think he only got serious about his faith when he was about 17 or 18. So it's kind of like, there's just not enough of a window to know if you've got a track record on this, you know? And even at that, when he was like between 15 and 17, close to 18, he was in like a facility for angry youth, you know, kind of thing, and had some trouble because he came from a really dysfunctional family. And so all the more I'm like, we kind of washed him out quickly just because we're like, seems like a great guy, has a really interesting story to tell, but I don't know if we would know if these qualities were really anchored in him yet, or if he was just coming into some of these or whatever. So, you know, we just really see that as like, there's no magic number. It's not like 10 years or 5 years or 20 years, but that you've had consistency in living. Like that's going to be these qualities must be true in that sense, and therefore these things must be displayed on an ongoing fashion and had been for a while for a person to be considered. So with that then said, we go into first of all the domestic qualities. Under the domestic qualities, number one, the husband of one wife or spouse. The husband of one wife or spouse. Now, in this, when we get into kind of the exegetical components of it, some people go, well, does that mean they can't be a polygamist? Because polygamy was pretty rampant in the Hebrew scriptures, but by the time of the first century, wasn't a thing. It was outlawed by the Roman Empire. They were not big fans of polygamy. And so, you know, that's not so much what he's getting at. But what was true was infidelity. That was super common in marriages in the Roman Empire. In fact, there's a quote at the bottom that was from a writer in their day. Mistresses we keep for the sake of pleasure, concubines for daily care of the body, and wives to bear us legitimate children. So the idea is you have one wife, but you could also have a girlfriend on the side and all these things. And what Paul seems to be getting at is, no, this is literally a one-woman man, right? That's really what the Greek reads. And so kind of how we've taken that as a church is, aside from the obvious, like, hey, you know, you're a one-woman man, you're not cheating on your spouse or anything else, we've also kind of loosely held to the idea that if somebody was a follower of Jesus and 20 years ago was unfaithful in their marriage, but as a Christian, we've traditionally seen that as then they couldn't fulfill this office still. That their infidelity was inside their faith. And so we've kind of gone more down that road, where if their infidelity was before their faith, we treated that as different. That's kind of loosely the way this has been handled. I think in recent years, we probably are more apt to look at everything on a case-by-case basis than have a policy that's just this or just that. But when we first put Praxis together, we had a guy that actually had cheated on his wife and he wanted to be an elder, but it had been literally 20 years before. Actually, it had been 20 years and a wife before. In other words, he was a Christian, he was married, he had been unfaithful. They reconciled things, then she was unfaithful and left him for another man. And then he married another Christian woman, and he'd been faithful to her for like 20 plus years. And he wanted to be an elder, but he goes, I was unfaithful in my first marriage, but I was a Christian at the time. What are you guys going to do with that? And at that point, we're like, yeah, I think it's best for you not to be probably an elder in light of all of that, right? I think if the same thing was before our board today, I'm not sure what we would do with it, if we would do the same thing or not, right? I think this goes back to that case-by-case basis kind of thing, where in every other part of his world, including in our church, he very much was the qualities of an elder, and in some ways was functioning like an elder just in the way he did things around the church. And so it can be a little bit sticky the further back in the timeline you go, but kind of...
How long was he a Christian?
So this guy was in his, not super long, maybe about 7 years. Yeah, but long enough, yeah. You know. Real interesting dude. He had been like literally like a homeless guy, kind of on the streets because his parents were just a train wreck. And a white dude taken in by a black pastor who then kind of raised him in his late teens and then let him live with him in his 20s, and that's how he came to faith. He came to faith in this total black church. He's the only white dude there, and that kind of thing. And he and I just talked recently because he moved away a few years ago, but he had called me, we just chatted for a couple of hours or whatever else. Just one of the most sincerely godly men I know. And would have been probably a phenomenal elder because he was already eldering without being an elder, But back in the day when he did this, he was a part of the first Praxis group. I think we were a little bit more rigid on certain things, and some of that rigidity even comes out in what we'll see tonight, where I think now we would probably be a little bit more like case by case basis and try to discern it at that level instead of it being like, well, here's the policy. But there was a little bit of like, here's the policy at the time. And so we had a couple of guys that had started taking Praxis to be elders, but they had infidelity as Christians in their past. And so that was an instant kind of stop.
What do you mean by infidelity? After they were married?
Yeah, so they were Christians, they were married, and then cheated in the context of their marriage.
I assume that doesn't go for if you had a wife that passed away and you remarried?
That's totally fine. Yeah. So we would say actually, if there was somebody's spouse passed away and they remarried, that's fine. Even in the realm of divorce, we would have more of a conversation about it where it's like, well, what were the conditions of the divorce? What were the reasons for the divorce? Because we've had people, not so much sitting on our board now, but we've had historically people that their spouse cheated on them and left them, and then they remarried, and we didn't see that as problematic.
Because they didn't cheat.
Right, because they didn't cheat. Right. So, but it's funny, not funny. Reality is, when you get into the innards of some of those circumstances, there's also lots of messiness in there. And I think where we're probably going to default more to is erring on the side of grace over judgment on things where we go like, yeah, we don't know what to do with all of that. Like, there's going to be things where it's like, he said, she said, we don't know, all of those details. And so there's probably just a little bit more of a propensity to, God knows we don't know, and we're going to err on the side of grace with that more than the side of judgment. So, yep. So a little bit more probably loose on some of those things at times, but still trying to have a high standard at the same time. So that's kind of the husband of one wife. We see it as just, you have to be faithful to your spouse. That's the key component of that. You don't have to be married to be a leader, right? Because Jesus wasn't married, Paul wasn't married. Paul was probably married at some point because he was a Pharisee. That would have been almost like status quo, but his wife might have passed away, or who knows, maybe she left him when he converted. We don't even know. We just know that he was realistically once married, and then he ended up single and that kind of thing. But this is going to be just about faithfulness. Marital fidelity is kind of the key to this component here. So any other questions on that? Man, that's like a nice little golden hue there. All right. So number 2, he must be one who manages his own household well. All right. And here it's interesting because manages, he's going to get into this twice, and he's going to use 2 different Greek words. But on this one, it means one who goes before. So it has that idea of like a point leading kind of thing. And here we said an elder, if they are negligent spiritually, emotionally, physically, or financially toward their wife or kids, then they are ill-equipped to lead God's household, right? And even that idea of doing it well has this idea of doing things commendably, achieving the desired results. So, because part of the idea is if you can't lead your own home well, how could you lead in the church context well? And so when people are doing this for the purpose of becoming an elder, for example, we also interview the spouse. We want to know, like, are they the Christian at home they are here? Do you think they lead your home well? And if the spouse is like, no, then it's like, well, maybe you should focus on your home before your house has an issue. This house is not nearly as important as your house. If you can't do your house, you can't do this house, kind of thing. So that's kind of the spirit behind that one. Number 3, keeping his children under control with all dignity. That is the third quality that Paul outlines here. And this one, again, I've left what we originally had, but I think it's really interesting too as time's gone on and we've probably wrestled with some of these things. there's a spirit that we think is really important, because under control was a military word, right? So it had to do with like lining everything under rank and file, but we didn't want it to be like, oh, so a good elder is one that controls their home, right? That's not a good elder. Rather, it's the idea of they lead in such a way that their kids, for example, are willing to submit, as opposed to their submission is required, right? You don't want an elder that's, you don't want a dominating father figure to be a dominating elder in that regard or anything like that. And so it's about respect versus this idea of manipulation or force. So, and part of it, when we're looking at somebody that might be a candidate, we're like, how do their kids relate to them? How do they relate to their kids? Like, looking at that dynamic. And it was interesting, like when I was a candidate for Duval Church, I was coming in behind a guy who did not have good relations with his kids. So he had 3 teenage kids, and that came up time and again. They're like, he didn't have a good relationship with his kids didn't really like him, and they're like, we should have seen that. Like, that translated into the church. The way he handled his kids is the way he handled people in the church. And so, because I remember Dana said, she goes, the whole time you candidated for that whole week, I watched you with your kids. She goes, that's the only thing I was judging you on. Whatever you said, I don't remember. Your Q&A, don't remember. What you preached, don't remember. I watched you all week when you didn't know I was watching to see how you handled your kids. Yeah, it was pretty interesting, And I'm like, the pastor goes, no, that was the thing that won me over for you. Like you were attentive to your kids. You loved on them, and you didn't care if any, so I was like, it's probably a pretty good way to measure stuff out, right? So, with this too, it's a little tricky. In the first century, Roman law stipulated that a child of a parent was their child even into adulthood, right? So part of the question being, if Paul was talking to the church of Ephesus and he's like, hey man, here's Timothy, how you set up elders, does it mean then that a guy's 35-year-old son has to be under control with all dignity for him to be an elder? Or is his child an autonomous person and it's just kids in the house? Probably in Paul's world, they would have judged an elder by his adult kids' actions still. We're not sure we can't say that for sure, but that would probably be the implication in that culture. But for us here, we don't apply that in that way. Like, we don't go, hey, Scott, your 35-year-old daughter, if she's doing whatever she's doing, we're going to apply that to you and say that you're not a qualified elder because of whatever she does. Or for me, with my 25-year-old gay son that lives in South Carolina, that doesn't get applied to me. Like, well, what's your son doing, Matt, in South Carolina? And are you a qualified elder based on what your 25-year-old son does or whatever else? And so we see this as a little bit more under roof. Like, kids under your roof, they need to have this kind of disposition where, again, until they're an adult. That we've kind of landed more in that space. So I'm giving you a sense of where we land. There's other places that would say, nope, your adult kids also reflect on your reputation, and therefore you may not be able to be an elder if you've got an adult kid that's reckless or out of control or whatever else. And I think we would say, man, if you've got a kid that's out of control as an adult and you feel like you need to devote time to helping them, maybe you shouldn't be an elder so you can have that time, but not because you're not qualified to be an elder because you have a 35-year-old son who struggles with alcoholism and poor spending, or whatever it is, and we go, sorry, you can't be an elder here. We don't take that track. I know of churches that do, but we don't take that track here. So we're a little different on that sense. And then that leads into number 4, having children who believe, not accused of rebellion and that kind of thing. Again, what's tricky here is the Greek word is in the passive voice. So it can be translated as either faithful or believing. So faithful doesn't necessarily mean they believe in Jesus. It just means they're faithful to your parental authority. They're faithful to the rules of the house. They're faithful to, submitting to their parents, whatever it is. Where believing is they would have to be a Christian. And there's a case made both ways on this Greek usage here, right? And so what we've landed on, again, I'm just giving you more like where we come at with this, is we say, you know what? Parents don't control the believing of their kids. No matter how well-intended, no matter what you do, no matter how much you try, sometimes your kids just don't believe. And so we treat this more, we land more on the faithful side. Like, your kids under your roof They have to be faithful to what you expect of them. They have to be under control, previous thing, but we're not saying your kids have to be believers to be an elder. And certainly with adult kids, we don't go, your kids have to be believers for you to be an elder. We just treat it more as your kids have to be faithful to you and what you expect of them as they're growing up in your home. So, because, all three of our kids grew up in the church. All three of our kids would say they love the faith of our home. Like, they speak very positively about the faith of our home. But they all got wounded in church too, and youth group in particular. And so all three of our kids stepped away from the faith. But actually now, like, our oldest is legitimately back in. Like, she comes in with a new perspective, but very much back in. Our middle daughter's trying to put the pieces together in her head. Like, how does this work and fit? And she's not so sure because she has a major struggle with the evangelical church in general in her culture. And some of that is well-earned, And then our youngest, Grayson, we were just talking about him earlier. I think he's just trying to figure out the whole, the binary of if you're gay and you want to follow Jesus, you can't follow Jesus if you're gay. That messaging is the hiccup for him, where he's just like, so he's trying to figure out, I think he's slowly drifting back into warm to Jesus, but I think he got very closed off because it was very binary in that regard.
You would say on a situation like that, you would tell him he could be a believer as long as he doesn't practice his gay belief. But if he practices, he can't be a believer.
Yeah, and that was very much like the messaging that he was given, especially when he was younger. And so there was no nuance in it. Everything was just, it's this path or that path, and there was no nuance in the midst of that. And I think from that, he got very like, okay, then if there's no nuance, then I'm completely done with Jesus, because clearly he's done with me, kind of thing. And so there was that. But I think now he's kind of trying to figure out like the place of faith, the value of faith, the person of Jesus. Like, so he's processing a lot more. Where before I think he was just like, I'll never process that again. Kind of related to this, but in a different way, is so he was 17 when, we knew when he was 12, like that's when it first hit our radar that this was going to be sort of the thing that he was facing. And from about 12 to 14, I think I managed it terribly. I didn't manage the heart. I managed a lot of other things that I think I did more damage than good. And then there was an equilibrium for a while. Huh? There's no. It's weird now. I did a 4-part podcast on that years ago, and I still to this day get people from all over the world that come across that podcast, and then they reach out to me. They're like, "Hey, we just found out our child's gay. What do I do?" And a lot of them are in ministry and things like that. And there's the unique pressures of that. Like, some people in the church, they've never lived it, but they certainly have an answer for it, kind of thing. And so I just sent a message to a guy last night, that was a pastor in the South, and he's like, my son just told me he's gay, and I don't know what to do, but I feel like I'm pulling away from him, and I don't mean to, but I think I'm screwing this up. What do I need to do, kind of thing. So yeah, it's a real interesting ride for sure. But as I say on this one, since Grayson was 17 and was still in our home, then our elders had to figure out, am I qualified to be an elder, pastor, right? Because now I have a son that's like, I don't believe like you believe. Again, it was binary, so I'm leaving the faith completely because this is who I am, and they don't merge. And so, he made that, and so, they had to get together as elders and go like, hey, do we think that this is something that disqualifies Matt from serving as a pastor because it's under his roof? It's his, son living there and that kind of thing. And then they actually reached out to Westminster Seminary down in California, because Scott had some connection to it and that kind of thing. And they said, hey, here's our circumstance. Do you think our pastor is still qualified to be an elder and pastor in our church? And they're like, well, Jesus had Judas and he didn't win him over. So, they kind of had this like, you can't control all these factors. And how did Matt father his son? Like, that became the more important thing to them. Was he a good dad? Was he a present dad? Was he, how's he navigating this? All that stuff. And then from that, they're like, no, we think you're still qualified. But again, that goes back into the nuance of a thing. It can just be as easy, oh, he's 17, he doesn't believe, and he's gay. Nope.
Right.
But when you're in relationship and in community, you realize there's a lot more nuance in some of these discussions too, you know. So they kept me around. There you go. So I'm still here. And that was, gosh, man, when was that? 8 years ago, I guess. So, because Gray's going to be 25 and he was 17 at the time, so somewhere in there. So, yeah. Anyway, that was quite a ride. So, number 5, top of page 107, or any questions on that I should ask. So, some of these level out is easier.
It occurs to me that by going through those hard things, God opens doors for you to minister to people who are truly seeking, who may be on the gay spectrum.
Yeah, no, it's pretty wild. I mean, you know, even I think I shared it here, but even like, you know, my heart of going to Pride events, for example, I'm going there because they think pastors hate them. They think evangelicals hate them. I get it. The messaging's pretty strong, right? And so, but I don't think I would have ever been led to do that if I didn't have a gay kid. You know what I mean? And yeah, I think part of the story is mistakes made on my part, and then part of the story is how I can say to another parent who has a 12-year-old kid that, you know, they find something out. I can first say, like, you know, if you want somebody just to cry with you, I'll cry now. So yeah, it does things that you wouldn't anticipate, and that's why I told this pastor when I sent him the message last night. I said it's going to be a really weird, sweet and sour ride, you know. And I can't even put it into full words, but it's going to be one of those things where really beautiful things come out of it, and you're going to be challenged in ways you don't foresee. And the biggest thing I told him is, I said, you know what? There is an entire grouping of people out there that are going to love your son in his space, and you better outlove them, because if you don't, they'll love him, you know. And I said, so that's going to be the biggest thing you have to figure out, especially since he said he was pulling away from his son in light of it. Like, you can't do it, because somebody will love him, you know, and you got to outlove that, you know. So yeah, it is, you're right. It living those things brings out a whole different way of seeing some of this stuff too, you know, and just people, and, you know,
there's a different heart of what's going on in the heart of that child.
Yeah. That's the thing. I was just having a conversation with a guy last week, and I said, you know, the volleys from the left and the right on the topic, where, you know, the Christian evangelical right has it kind of vilified in some ways, and then the left shames anybody that isn't super affirming. And for the millions of us in the middle of that social debate, doesn't help. Neither side is helping at all. Like, you just get
no matter what you say, you're going to be wrong.
Yeah, you know, so it's like, you know, if you're not all in, you get shamed. If you're not all against, you get judged, you know. And I'm like, it's complicated. Like, our neighbors have a trans child, and like Leo was 5 when Leo was like, Mom and Dad, I'm not the right. I'm a boy. I'm not a girl. I'm a boy. I'm not a. And there was no inputs into Leo's life. There was no. I mean, like, they weren't like these big, you know, pride waving flag family or anything like that. I mean, they were just like, what are we? And then Leo was like struggling with suicide by the time he was like 7, 8, 9. You know, like, just all this stuff. Like, clearly, there's something in this child. Chalk it up as you want. There's something in their brain that sees things a certain way and cannot find peace. And so they kind of resisted. And then finally, they're like, our kid's going to kill himself by the time they're 14. And so they said, all right, we're going to go on this ride. We're not going to do chemical things or biological things, but you can start identifying and dressing. And they're like, we got our kid back. As soon as they said, okay, we're going to go down this road with you, they're like, we got our kid back. And all of those things began to subside or whatever else. And they're like, we're not a bunch of liberal people. And they're like, we're just trying to figure this out as parents. You know, we don't know what we're doing, you know, but they're like, but boy, do we feel alone and judged, you know. Because again, it's the cultural debate. And for the people that are super pro, it still doesn't help that family that's like, stop shaming my family members that don't know what to do with this. It's hard. They don't know what to do with it. They can't fathom that Amy is now Leo and they're struggling, but don't judge my family for struggling. Let us work this through, So yeah, it can be really, really challenging that way. But I've got now like 4 pretty decent friends that have trans kids, and that one is, wow, it is so hard on those families. Like, people don't get it when it's just this big cultural debate about athletes or whatever else, and I'm like, yeah, I get it, but boy, for these families, forget the athlete thing, but just for these families, it is, there's so no manual for that, and what to do that's right and wrong, and it is hard, man. It is so hard. So
I think this is all because of sin. I mean, obviously it is, but I mean, when I grew up, you didn't hear much of that stuff, I mean, even you never heard much about gays, stuff like that. But nowadays, you almost can't look at, you almost know somebody that, or 2 people that have a gay person in a family member now.
Yeah. Now, it's funny. I think there's probably, nobody really knows any of the full scope. I mean, there's a part of me that wonders how much was just in closets, so to speak. Literally, it was the whole thing coming out of the closet. I think there was a lot of things in closet. I really wonder if in 100 years, science is going to be able to look back and be like, all that stuff we were doing with our food and what we, because, I think we'll be shocked to find out that, all the stuff that we're doing may have some downstream impact.
Study that males in this generation have lower testosterone than ever before.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder if some of it isn't because of environmental causes.
Yeah. No, I really wonder if science is going to crack that and be like, oh, crap, we created some of the messes there because we were making cheap food with lots of crud in it. Well, it was interesting, too, because I read a paper. So when Ellen was pregnant with Grayson, she ended up with a thyroid condition that was generated by the pregnancy. So her thyroid was massively off. And the downstream effect of that is they found that to increase the rate of gay males born to women who had that thyroid condition while they were pregnant. And so, because I mean, from the time, like, I'm watching my grandson, it's so wild because my son, like, if you hang out with little boys, right? Like, my grandson is always making car noises and train noises and likes all that stuff and that was not my son. Like, my son had none of that in him as a little boy. None of it. Just none of those things came out. He was always skewed more toward his sisters. And so, when people talk, is it acquired? Is it born with? Whatever else? I can't speak for everybody. I can speak for my kid and go like, man, from the earliest days, you kind of wondered, yeah. And so it is, I'm not sure where the science will take us, but I do kind of wonder, like, because what happened with Ellen's thyroid condition is it actually increased her estrogen levels. And I think if Gray got a testosterone test, he would test low, So there was just things that can happen with our body chemistry that can mess stuff up. And I just can't help but wonder, how much these sweet women that are having babies, we're eating crappy food and have environmental factors that might have some impact on that. It's just a hypothesis for me at this point, but I kind of wonder what they'll find as time goes on, because could that be some of the increased reasons for that? Because again, our hormones affect our sexuality so uniquely, and if mom's hormones are off, it could affect baby's hormones in development. So, yeah. So I'm kind of curious because my son and I have sat on the back porch and had many deep dive conversations. Like, I've got the resource, so to speak, so I've tried to utilize it. And he's like, he goes, Dad, what's your feeling inside the idea of if you were to make out with another guy with a beard, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty off-putting, right? And he goes, that's how I feel about women. The notion of kissing a woman turns my stomach. Like, he goes, it feels gross inside. It feels wrong inside, that notion, and that goes back, that's why it's just wired in there. something's wired in there. We could get into how the wiring got broken or whatever else. But he's like, that's my honest feeling on it. So the idea of like, you're choosing this. He's like, I would have to do a hard choose to be interested in a woman. And even then, I don't think I could bring myself to it. It's that off-putting, Yeah. So it really, I know this is a totally different topic than this, but yeah, it's interesting to get that access to talk to people that way or whatever else. Or we have some friends that have a trans son now. And it was interesting because the new Montana law that you have to use the bathroom based on your assigned gender at birth. What's tricky is if our friend's now son lived in Montana, women would be very offended that she walked into their bathroom because she is so male looking, beard, husky. They would think a big man just walked into their bathroom. But that by law, she would have to do that. Or that would be what would have to. So I'm like, it's kind of, once they make these transitions, sometimes you're like, that I would have never known, with our friends. Like, you would never know. And so it's that oddity of like, is that what you want to? Like, all these women be like, why is this guy in the bathroom suddenly, And it's just because that transition really took, and they've been living in that space now for 15 years, I think, something like that. So yeah, been a male for 15 years. And so, yeah, it's just, again, you talk to these families, every story is different. Every challenge is different. Yeah. So tough space to live in sometimes, for sure. When I talk to my friends that have trans kids, I'm like, there's a part of me at times like, glad I got the gay kid, because it's exponentially harder. Just so hard in there, man. So, yeah. So lots of lessons learned. Lots of conversations had. Yeah. Always learning. So, page 107, number 5. All right, we're blazing here. What time is it? 7:45. Okay, but if a man does not know how to manage his own household well, how will he take care of the church of God? Whereas manages in verse 4 was about going before, this one is about kind of coming behind, right? So he changes the Greek word on manages here a little bit. And so I like that. Matter of fact, it has the idea of binding up. It's used of the Good Samaritan. And so, again, part of the job of a leader in the church is to know how to be the visionary, plot a course, go ahead, but also to come behind the church too and really care, invest, scoop up the poop that comes by, whatever it is, right? But you got to have that kind of disposition. Next, number 6 is hospitality, which hospitality literally translates as a love of strangers. Eventually, because the church got so good at hospitality, then they also were good at hospice and hospitals and all the other derivatives of this Greek word or whatever else. But an elder has to want people in their space, right? And want people in their life in some ways, and to love that element. That doesn't mean, like, Sam and I were talking earlier, that I kind of fall on the introverted side of the spectrum. Which all that means is then I have to put a little extra energy into being obedient. You know what I mean? So it's like, it doesn't mean, well, sorry, Matt's an introvert, so he's not hospitable. No, it just means it's going to take a little bit more work for Matt to be hospitable. But it's funny because Ellen always reminds me, like, you're always like, oh, I got to do a thing. But once you're doing it, you enjoy it. I'm like, yep, that's true. So I just tell myself, when I'm in it, I'm going to love it. Process that we're going to do it, I got to get myself saddled up for that sometimes. So, but luckily my wife is very, very much hospitable, so she makes up for my weaknesses on this sometimes. So it's pretty good. So those are some of the qualities. Next are the moral qualities, right? So there's different layers of the qualities. So the first one there is above reproach, which literally means not able to be held. And the idea there is just, again, not open to attack or criticism in terms of our Christian life in general or characteristics of things in our character particularly. Like, it's just this idea that says, you know what? Elders have to have a sense of consistency and reliability in what they do, right? Not perfect, but above average on the idea of above reproach, right? The second thing is temperate. Temperate literally has this idea of holding no wine, which is just an old kind of original kind of cultic usage of the word. In time, it sort of grew into the notion of a sobriety of mind or clear thinking. So,
You don't have a problem with elders drinking?
nope.
Some churches I know they do.
Yeah. No, matter of fact, that will come up in a minute here too. It'll be one of the, let's see, where it'll be number 5 on this list, not addicted to wine. We'll talk about that. On this one, it really is about a disposition of, in some ways I'd say temperate is also like not reactive, like you don't want a really reactive leader. You want somebody that at least pause, contemplate, can process something and then have a response. So we talk about sometimes even on our board meetings, like we're not going to react, we're going to respond. And to respond means we have to take some time to actually come up with a response, because it's real easy to just snap judge things. In fact, when I first came, our associate pastor at the time was a very reactive person, and kind of the temperament of some of the leadership was very reactive. So if somebody in the church said, I don't like this, it was a reaction. Like, we'll stop it. We'll get rid of it, or whatever it is. And so I remember one of the first cardinal rules of Matt when I came, as I said, okay, unless 10% of our people are in the office with the same problem at the same time, we're not going to react. We're going to process, we're going to respond, we're not going to react. And I remember it was Scott Thompson, because he was just our part-time junior high pastor at the time. And he's like, dude, that is the best rule anybody's ever created around here. He goes, everything is reaction all the time, and it's usually just because one person said something, and I remember like John Olson was a great guy, and he adopted it. It took a little bit, but he adopted it. But my first 3 weeks, he would come into my office, dude, we got a problem. I'm like, what is it? Well, so-and-so said this, and so it's a major problem. I'm like, no, you mean one person said it, and that's a major problem? Because I'm going to get 3 people to say the opposite to solve it then, I guess. So, so just, I got to chill a little bit. So anyway, don't react, respond. Response takes time. Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. So number 3, they have to be prudent, which literally it's kind of 2 words, mean saved mind. But really prudence about, again, self-control, the ability to control one's passions. It's an inner fortitude, again, which is, it's going to be key in the leadership thing, because there's going to be things that get said or things that get done. And one of the things we talk about sometimes at our elder level is when the time you have to shepherd the most thoughtfully is when you're shepherding people that don't like you or opposed to you. Because it's really easy at that point to not be prudent. You get self-defensive, you get feisty, whatever it is. And it's like, no, you have to have this internal fortitude that when somebody is against you, you're still for them. And when they're not very loving toward you, you must be all the more loving toward them, kind of thing. And so if that's something that isn't kind of deep inside a person's sense of like moral compass, they're probably not going to be a very good elder. You know what I mean? Because at some point, you're going to be faced with that, and you got to keep your cool, right? And so that's just an internal thing that you have to have in there. Next, though, is respectable. That's number 4. And this is the external kind of counter or the external component to the internal prudent, right? So it's the people can look and go, yeah, you are self-controlled. Yeah, you don't react. Yeah, you do respond. Yeah, you are level, and therefore from that, there's just a sense of like, I respect that person because, again, they know what they're doing, and they don't overstep, and they don't get wild or reckless or whatever else. And so, and just having, I think we had here, a cultural sensitivity to the stated norms and expectations of a given environment. So it's also just even knowing the spirit of this local church. Like we had a guy that was put in for the youth director position, and Scott listened to one of his messages and went, yep, that guy won't be a fit. He might be a fit somewhere else, but he won't be a fit for us because he won't be respected here because he comes across as a jerk. Instead of gracious, he comes across as a little bit more like, I know everything. And so we have a disposition here that's a little bit more like, we're curious, we ask questions, we have a lot of more open-handedness, and he was going to be a little bit more close-fisted. And we're like, he just won't be respected here. He'll be seen as kind of an odd fit or a non-fit because he would have enough kind of just out of sync with us kind of thing. So that's kind of the respectable component. Number 5, not addicted to wine. It says the injunction here is paralleled elsewhere in pastorals with the general understanding that alcohol consumption is permitted, but that misuse, abuse, or addiction is prohibited. Literally, the word concept here is not one who lingers long next to wine. You don't always have a full cup next to you, and you're just, cup's full, but you're also drinking at the same time, which means you're just refilling kind of thing. But yeah, we didn't always hold this position because, again, when I came to Duval Church, it was a teetotaler denomination. And so it was total, like, it was banned, barred, you couldn't do it. And so when I was brought up on charges in the denomination, that was one of the many charges that I was brought up on, is that I wasn't abiding by the doctrinals or the bylaws of the denomination on alcohol consumption. And I said, well, I don't, because I think the New Testament and the Old Testament actually condones it, and I'm not going to override the Bible with your bylaws. So you could tell that conversation went well. That went super great. I'm like, Jesus made 160 gallons of it at a wedding, man. What do you want? I don't know what we're doing here, Deuteronomy commands that you drink with your tithe money. I didn't write it. I'm just quoting it. So they didn't think it was funny. So I still think it's funny. Anyway, so for us, it's not prohibited, but certainly abuse is prohibited kind of thing. So any questions on prudent, respectable, or not given to much wine? Yeah.
It doesn't seem measurable. It seems it must be case by case. Right?
Yeah, it's kind of like, I put it in the same realm as like greed is hard to measure, so to speak, too, and or some of those things that are a little like murkier, where like, well, there's it can be good and then it can turn bad, but yeah, for each case it might be a little bit different. I think even in our world, I mean, just being candid about it, I think if we went like, there was some party and one of our elders got sauced or whatever else, I don't think we're like, oh, then you're no longer an elder, because it's like, hey, do you think that was prudent? It'd probably be a conversation. Now, if it was a regular happens, then it would be like, do you have a thing, can we come alongside you on? Do you need some extra help? Is this a unique challenge or whatever else? I would like to think we would do that on pretty much all of the things. I think there's some that are probably a little bit more like a clear demarcation, like infidelity would probably be a harder line, where some of these things, because taking out of this for a second and putting it into something else, there may be a time where I'm dealing with a real problematic person, and from that number 6, I'm pugnacious, right? So I might have an occasion of being pugnacious, but does that make me truly pugnacious in my character? Same thing. If somebody had, they were at some event and they, had a little too much to drink, I don't know if we go like, oh, busted. Might be like, probably don't want to do that again, and have it a conversation at that level. So yeah, but so far we haven't had to remove anybody for those problems, so that's pretty good. But just again, on the openness of it all though, like when we were doing the men's base camp thing that we used to do every summer, because we had a rule that says, hey, you can have beer here, but or wine or whatever you want to drink. And so we had that open, but because it was an outreach event, we also had some people definitely over drinking, and part of it's kind of tricky because, well, it's an outreach event. Too, you're having guys that don't follow Jesus and they're doing whatever, but then you had other guys that follow Jesus, but they were with their buddies that don't, and that kind of thing. And I think after a couple of years, we're like, okay, we're going to limit the window. So we're not going to ban it, but we're going to limit. So after 6 p.m. and stop by 9 or something like that. So we did some things there. And if you were going to the range, you could not drink anything before you went to the range, because we went to the big range there and that kind of thing. So we're always trying to kind of keep some principles in play, but we also didn't want to become legalists and be like, here's all the new rules that we're going to apply, just like the Pharisees would apply a bunch of rules to a good biblical idea, but all the applications became rules as well, and we were always trying to dance with that or whatever else. So you would know when it was the award ceremony for, we'd had different gun range competitions and bicycle competitions and all this stuff, and it was given the trophies at the end of the night, and a few guys that had had a few too many, and then so good. They're like, yep, that guy right there. Oh, we're gonna cut him off at 9 o'clock. All right. So So an imperfect science for sure. Yeah. Number 6, pugnacious, since I mentioned it. Not a striker or one who delivers blows, but again, this is seeing this as both in tongue or in hand. So again, you don't want a contentious elder.
So you're talking about somebody that's quick to get into a fight, basically.
Yeah. And I think there's some people that even kind of enjoy it. You know what I mean? So they like being the rabble rouser. They like being the whatever it is. And so all the more, because especially in our model, because it's 100% agreement around a table on every decision, you can't afford to have somebody that just loves to be like the pugnacious devil's advocate on everything. It's good to have somebody that thoughtfully is the devil's advocate, right? They're like, hey, let's look at this from the other side and let's consider this. But if it's a person that's just easily temperamental, and can't communicate in hard times well, if they get really feisty themselves or they get really pent up and you can just feel it, it does not serve or facilitate useful conversation. You're starting to try to manage their temper across the table, and then you're not wanting to say something that gets them worked up, and so all the more it removes real open, honest dialogue kind of thing. So pugnacious is bad. Therefore, number 7 is good, gentle, right? They're not pugnacious, but they are gentle, right? This is about kindness, understanding, sympathy, especially when it comes to criticism, weakness, foolishness, all that stuff in the church, because you're going to have things where people say or do things that I think behind closed doors you go, yeah, that was stupid. Like their idea was dumb, or they did a dumb thing or whatever else. But you have to be gentle with those people, as opposed to that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, or how dare you, or whatever it is, And we've certainly had some things over the years where we're dealing with people that have done clearly wrong things, and clearly are blind to the wrongness, and even defensive of the wrong that they've done. And even there, you have to approach it with gentleness. In fact, I would say it's the only hope of probably kind of getting around behind them and helping them is to deal with them gently. The church I trained in particular, I would say when people did dumb stuff, our leadership was pugnacious toward people's sins. So it's like, if somebody did something sinful in the church, there was almost like a superiority problem where it was like we confront them harshly and we would give them ultimatums quickly, and there was no sense of like weeping with them, or if they were kind of resistant, like, they'd done something foolish and at first they were defensive, we were just like, well, now you're doubly sinful, and we would just kind of pound them. Almost like trying to pound them into submission. And it was just a terrible mechanism, because it really didn't deal with the heart, and it forgot grace in the process of it. And so, I've seen the more than enough damage done with poor confrontation where it's done pugnaciously as opposed to gently. So for us, we go, no, elders got to be gentle, So any questions on any of that so far? Cool. Number 8. This is kind of connected to all of that. Peaceable. Peaceable means reluctant to fight. That's the spirit of that whole thing right there. And, again, it doesn't mean peace at any cost, but it means that we need to really love peace and want to be peacemakers and go out of our way to do that. And it's funny, I go back to this recent thing that I've shared with you guys that we went through for like 6 months or whatever else. And again, no board is going to do everything perfectly. But if there was anything I think our board did really well in that whole thing was seeking to be peaceable as much as we could. Like, let's meet, let's talk, let's outline the things we're concerned about, but we understand we may be missing something. We don't have the full picture. We want to have that interaction or whatever else. And so, I do think that, and even by taking the time that we did, like instead of just abruptly shutting everything down and saying, okay, we're finished, but really, I think it went on so long that it became problematic at different levels, but I think the heart behind it was trying to make peace. And I think my disposition in particular is trying to find the and versus the or. That's just kind of deep in me, just as a person. And so I think I'm just hoping we're going to find the and I think that comes back to trying to be a peacemaker as much as possible. In the end, we weren't able to make the peace. That was kind of the drag. And so then we found peace in a different way, which was setting a boundary. You guys go that way, we'll go this way. Hopefully we can find some peace there. But it was never punitive, and it was never meant to be punishing. It was just meant to, this is the only way we're going to find peace at this point. So sometimes you have to do that too. So
I'm not on social media, so I wasn't able to.
That's no fun.
Happen. But I know you were worried about that. Did anything ever come up?
There was only one thing, and it was in that first 24-hour window where, she put out there that, you try to stand up for students against spiritually abusive leaders, and this is what you get. And then it was the tail end of the letter that we sent to them. And then that was it. We're like, all right, we can take that. And it was weird because some of the people that are connected to her on I think it was Instagram. I'm not really on Instagram, but some of those people, like, they came and they're like, we can't believe she said that. Like, we get differences of opinion, but to call you guys abusive leaders, come on. Like, in a weird sort of way, it kind of, I want to be cautious. I don't want to say, like, aided the cause of our actions, but I think it helped people go like, wow, if that's what they're saying publicly,
There was a disconnect.
then we've never known our leaders to be like that. So I think her accusation so elevated from what reality was that people were able to kind of discern it a little bit easier. I'm like, oh, okay, well, there might be a he said, she said, but on this one, that doesn't compute. So, so there's been a couple of things since, even in the last couple of weeks, where, like, he emailed me and said, I'm going to put together a big public meeting. Do you want to come? Because I'm going to, share all the stuff that we think the elders did wrong. And I said, no, I'm not going to come to that meeting. I said, Scripture's pretty clear. If you have a problem with the person, you go to the person. You don't get a bunch of other persons to go talk to that, about that person too. I said, I'll meet with you happily, but I'm not coming to a meeting to air all this stuff again. Yeah, and I said, but I don't think you want this either, really, and then it seems to have gone away, I am meeting with a pastor here in town on Wednesday because they've gone to that church and I think given him kind of an earful of stuff. And he's like, can I just hear it from you? And we're friends, and that kind of thing. And so, it's still kind of floating out there, but I think everybody's like, we're just really glad to be past it now. And
well, at least he's willing to come. The other pastor's willing to come.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of times they hear it, they never check on it. So.
Yeah, no, what's nice about things here in town is all the pastors somehow are pretty interconnected. Either through myself or Scott, we're friends with all the other guys in town. And so there's a real mutual respect for the churches. Nobody's connected to the Catholic Church, really. I mean, we've tried, they're just in their own world, I think. Not in a bad way, just it is what it is. But the rest of us are all pretty decent friends. And so, when the bricks shuffle, if there's a question mark, we can, hey, they're coming here, just checking, is this good or bad, kind of thing. So it's pretty nice that way. I mean, it's funny, there's a lot of bonuses to be a part of a church in Duval, and that's one of them. I mean, there's a number of things that make it really unique. And that's one of the bonuses we actually connect.
There could be really good larger church implications from that. Like, they can tailor their approach based off your feedback if the goal is to help them with whatever they're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's pretty cool. And what's been fun over the time too, like, we've all kind of rushed each other's aid at different times. Like, even like when we were hubless for a while, like Stillwater was letting us use their building for youth. Adventure was letting the women use, so it's been super, super handy.
It speaks to my heart because it's like, that's the church of
That's
Christ.
what it should be.
Yeah.
The greater church.
Yeah.
And that's so cool.
Yeah, no, it is really
See
cool.
that happen.
Yeah. Well, it was funny when Timberlake was first coming to town to do the satellite, I met with their lead guy at the time.
Ben?
Ben. That was not a love connection between Ben and I. I don't know what it was. He was just like, hey, man, I'm not here to get to know you guys down there. We're just putting in a franchise, basically. It was just kind of like that. Like, I was like, because, we're all pretty connected in town. And he was just, we just got a bunch of, we're just putting a McDonald's in Duval, man, whatever. So I was just like, wow,
There's no franchise.
what a drag. It was at the time. Timberlake was a franchise.
things have changed,
But the guy that's at the campus now, I finally met him over doing the Christmas lighting this year. But Scott's gotten to know him pretty well. Seems like a super cool guy, and much more wants to be part of that connectedness and that kind of thing. And
So
so
you're not watching videos anymore?
I think they are still watching a lot of videos, but I think they're subbing out some of the stuff to the local campus guy to be speaking more too. So, and he just has a real heart for like mental health even, and actually has a podcast on mental health in the Christian space, which is sometimes really useful. And so, but just a really kind-hearted, sincere dude, And so he and I need to finally get together and get coffee and that kind of thing. But yeah, but Scott and he have been pretty tight, and they've helped each other on different things and stuff like that. So yeah, so it is pretty cool. I'm a big fan of that. I have so much more of an ecumenical spirit more than ever in my life probably, and so all the more I just kind of love that stuff. And it's all different flavors, right? Like Adventure Church reaches a kind of person that we just aren't very good at reaching. We reach a kind of person that Stillwater probably wouldn't be as good at reaching, but Stillwater reaches a group of people that we're not so good at reaching. So it's kind of cool that way. So I like it. Yeah, I think it's a net positive for sure. So, number 9, free from the love of money, filthy lucre, cash, cheese, cheddar. That one's pretty obvious, right? So, especially since you're managing money. Now, back in these days, there was not the checks and balances of leaders handling money in the churches. We have a lot of checks and balances here, so it comes in pretty handy. But again, it's just the spirit of it is generosity should be the heartbeat of a leader, not a love of how do they bank more cash. Therefore, number 10, not fond of sordid gain. This is that whole like NASB speak, a sordid gain. Literally means shameful profit. Right? That's what it's Greek. It's a compound of shameful and profit. And so this is just, going back to that leaders would have fiscal responsibility in their own personal lives and fiscal responsibility in the context of the local church. And so I put in my notes next to this, not prosperity preachers. So that's sordid gain to me. So
Speak it and believe it.
that's right. It's funny, man. Like I'll tell you what, one of the things nobody's a little boy growing up and says, one day I want to be a pastor that asks people for money on Sunday mornings. Like nobody wants to do that. I'm still not very good at it, so I don't really do it much. But luckily we have a very generous church, and I don't have to. We're going to pass the plate again and again and again. So we don't even pass plates anymore. I don't know. It's funny, we haven't done. I was trying to think. I don't think we've passed any plates since Sunday 1 at Redemption, and they were popcorn buckets. Yeah, because we didn't have anything, so somebody grabbed popcorn buckets. I think for the first few weeks we passed buckets, and then I'm like, can we just get a box and put it at the door, and if anybody wants to give, they can put it in the box. So.
It actually makes an impression on people that are visiting.
Oh yeah, including me. Like if I was visiting, I'm like, man, I'll pass this plate. So yeah, no, I think it
They're
does.
sitting there and they know it goes by them, and they don't put any. They feel guilty because
Well, that, or they go, oh, religion is just shaking you down. Yeah, religion just wants money. Churches just want money. That kind of thing. Like, even though probably I don't know, 98% of pastors and churches are not mega churches, and they're not prosperity preachers, they all get kind of lumped in there when it comes to churches asking for money. It's like, oh, there it is again.
you need to survive. You can't be.
You do.
There is a part of it that
Yeah, it's a practicality and a reality, and it's a part of all of our own individual spiritual development to be givers and to, that kind of thing too. So part of it is when we're putting that out there is it's giving opportunity for people to then do what the New Testament encourages. I'm not so much going to argue about whether it's quote a tithe, a 10% tithe. I see that as kind of an Old Testament model. I see Paul's New Testament model is more like give generously, give joyfully, whatever the Holy Spirit leads you to do. Yeah, I was going to say 10% was just one temple tax, and if you looked at the total annual giving of an Israelite, way higher actually, between all of the animals you give and the first fruits and crops and all the other every 3 years, every 7 years, it was way more. So I'm just more like, whatever the Holy Spirit leads you to do, that's what you do. If he leads you to do it here, great. If he leads you to do it elsewhere, great. just do that. So,
God says
yeah.
give out of the heart.
Yeah.
I mean, if you give a penny out of the heart,
Yeah.
you can do more with it than if
Yeah.
you just give it because you feel you have to.
Yeah. And what's been really cool here is that that's always been kind of our model, and God's always really taken care of us. Like every giving campaign we've ever had, we've always hit the target or exceeded it. Every single one for 13 and a half years. And certainly the building I thought was impossible. And then, we don't push giving. We don't, and people are just generous. Even like on our membership thing where it said, hey, we're not saying you have to give here, you have to give somewhere. And I remember, I think I've shared that before, where elders like, Matt, you sure you want to put that in the bylaws as a policy? I'm like, yeah, I don't think we need to mandate that if you're a member here, you give here. So you just got to mandate if you're a member here, you give somewhere. And they're like, I don't know, people probably won't give here. I'm like, well, newsflash, we've done totally fine, and I think in some ways God blesses it because of that, We've talked about that a lot too. Like as soon as we feel like there's been times where like, hey, this might be a little tight or whatever, so do we cut this thing? And I'm like, nope, we don't cut that thing. We do that thing still, because God's never blessed us because we got stingy, and so we move forward in a thing and then we're fine. Yeah, so it just works that way, So I've tended to always err on the side of generosity and push that in our leadership. Like, nope, we're going to be generous, and they're like, okay, and then God takes care of us. I'm like, that's why we have this building, because we weren't stingy. We were generous, and God gave us a building. So let's keep that pattern going. Just keep being generous. So always trying to figure it out. Number 11, not self-willed. Basically, leaders can't be egocentric. Can't have a self-interested, arrogant drive that disregards what's best for the church for the sake of their own personal endeavors. This would be especially like if you had somebody that had a pet ministry in the church, and they're, as the leader, they're just going to put all of the energy and focus toward their pet ministry at the cost of others. Like, nope, can't have that. Can't be self-willed. It's got to be, like a good example would be Trent. He's the elder over worship ministry, but he doesn't safeguard that at the cost of the church. Like when we're talking about budget and money and things of that nature or whatever else, and where we need to allocate funds, he'll be the first guy to be like, hey, we got to worry about the youth more than we worry about worship ministry right now. Let's go help the youth on that. Let's put money that direction or whatever else. So again, there's no self-willedness in silos around here. Everybody has a real heart for the overall well-being of the church and not just their own little corner of the world. So kind of a cool thing. Number 12, self-controlled. That's just mastery of one's actions externally, internally, that kind of thing. So pretty self-explanatory there. So with that, as we close 1:9, any questions? Yay! Now we're going to get into spiritual qualities. Things like number 1, skilled in teaching. So here is both about efficiency and effectiveness. And so in some ways this is a quality and a skill, but it's also a gifting. And so that doesn't mean that since this is still the qualities of an elder, it doesn't necessarily mean that they all have to be equally skilled in teaching, or that they all have to have the ability to teach in all contexts, but just that they still have to have the ability to, study, equip, exhort, guard the gate, those kinds of things. It may be one-to-one, it may be in a group setting, it may be on a Sunday morning on a platform, whatever it is. Everybody's going to be wired a little bit differently. Like, I can get up on front in Sunday and teach adults, but if you put me in the kids ministry, I would get panicked, I would start to sweat, I would be really nervous. I am not the best little kid teacher. I love the little kids and I love little kid ministry, but I just feel like I'm probably going to go over your head so fast, you're going to be like, who is this man? So give them a good kid teacher, and we have great kid teachers around here and stuff. So I'm not skilled in that teaching, but I'm skilled in another teaching, right? And it's the same with all of our elders. They have to be skilled in teaching, but how they execute that just depends, on different things. So anything on that?
So each elder or pastor doesn't have to be able to go up in front of the congregation every Sunday?
No. Because I think all of them could. I don't know if all of them would. And with that, it's kind of the reality that, like I remember this is back at our old church, but we would kind of rotate our elders in to preach, and there were certain ones where people were like, please tell me it's going to be a couple of years before he does that again. like he taught, I don't know what he said because it was so over my head. And so it's like he was very skilled to teach, but he was always very over everybody's head too. So yeah. So there's some of those sensitivities, I guess, that are in there as well. So I was thinking about it too. I'm like, because I was thinking about a couple of Sundays I'm going to miss here later in the year. And so I was going to hit up our elders for it. I don't think I've ever asked Tom Potter to preach on a Sunday morning. I mean, I just never thought about it. He's taught classes. He's taught different things. I should see if Tom wants to do that. That'd be kind of cool. I'm very jealous of his voice. So he's got a good, just like that man voice thing. So he might really rock it that way. So we'll find out. So let's see if I can hit him up. I think I asked him once and he told me no. Like he's like, I'm going to be gone or something like that. I don't remember what it was. So number 2, not a new convert. So they become conceited and fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. Literally, not new means newly planted. Like they can't be newly planted. So again, part of it is just church leadership comes down to an apprenticeship more than a degree in some ways. Like you have to do life, you have to face challenges, you have to process things, you have to develop wisdom, whatever it is. And so inside one's Christian faith, like you can be 65 years old, come to faith, even though you're an older person and you're gonna have all that life experience. As a convert, you're still new and you need more time in Jesus to kind of do that. So again, always want to be sensitive about that, which is why even some of these guys that have applied for the position were like, okay, you got serious about your faith. You came to Jesus at 18, now you're 22 and you want to be a pastor because you're so passionate, which is great, but you probably should be camping out in the church for a while still and develop.
There's a line in The Chosen that just came to my mind about that very thing where Jesus and the disciples are invited into a house to spend the night in Samaria. And the older man who owns the house says, oh, one of the rooms is haunted. And Jesus says, I'll take that one.
Oh, yeah, I remember this.
James later is rooming with him and says, how come you didn't tell him there's no ghosts or whatever? And Jesus says, I don't address everything at once with new converts.
Yeah, that's good. That's right. I remember that whole thing. That was a great little, yeah. And it's true. And because of that, a new convert is also, I remember when I was young and I started to really study, I was arrogant too. You know what I mean? There was just like I was so fascinated by it and so riveted by it. I had all this new knowledge and I wanted to spit it out, but really pridefully too, because I thought I knew everything, because I was just coming into it for the first time. It's so cool. So, not always good. Number 3, he must have a good reputation with those outside the church so that they don't fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Again, this is just a given. Sometimes we're like, well, it's just the reputation in the church that matters. No. In the eyes of disbelieving people, who you are is pretty important too, I remember years ago, there was a guy that had again, from an insider's perspective, everybody thought he was amazing. But there was disbelieving people in that person's life. They're like, to us, he's a jerk. He favors Christians and he kind of poo-poos non-Christians. And so he didn't have a good reputation, with the outside world. What was kind of an interesting dynamic is he was kind of a public figure, right? Like a local politician. And then, had a very pronounced public faith. And then as we were kind of doing the investigation of like, hey, does this person become this is back in Spokane. When we were doing the investigation, they become an elder. It was definitely, some other people in the church, they do not have a good reputation outside of this world, and so we were looking to look more and go like, yeah, that might be true. That kind of thing. So part of it, being a public figure is going to make you a lightning rod in some ways too. But it did seem like their rhetoric definitely slanted a direction in public spaces. And so, again, no better way of putting it, they are conservative on the right. They certainly talked a lot of trash about disbelievers on the left. And so they weren't respected by that community. And I go, fair. You're not terribly loving to that community. You kind of do sound more like a pundit. than a follower of Jesus out in the world. Like you just assume they go to hell kind of thing, like they're earning it kind of deal. And this is the scourge of society or whatever else. And so that was kind of a thing where, okay, yep, there's the problem there. Yeah. Number 4, loving what is good. That one's just good people, good things. Just got to be a lover of what's good in life, not terribly deep, but certainly important. Top page 111, number 5, they need to be just. Passion for justness, equality, and righteousness. Again, some of these are on the surface pretty easy, but again, it's required to be that in all circumstances. Like I go back to what we went through for the last 6 months, and when we were talking through what were the things that were like the offenses or the problems, and we had a lot of discussion about what is concrete and we know is true as opposed to what we think or feel or could speculate. And I think that comes into this idea of trying to be genuinely just, have balanced scales in some ways, right? It's pretty easy when things get spun up relationally that you start speculating and assuming a lot of either motivations, whatever it is, and you can build really big cases that are rooted in assumption or fiction or insecurity, whatever it is. And that's where you have to kind of level it out and go, no, what's concretely true and factual, that's where we're going to plant our flag and kind of go from there. That's that spirit of justness, And I still love these people that are against me right now. That's also a part of justness. I'm going to keep balanced no matter what and fight for that. And I found that sometimes that's the only thing that can kind of stabilize kind of chaotic moments in church life is you almost have to be like the blind lady justice a little bit and try to do it that way. It'd be hard with our humanness in there, but nonetheless, it needs to be sought. So, number 6, devout. Paul says these leaders need to be devout, set apart. This is a derivative of the word holiness. So, it's tightly related to that. So, Jesus was uncommon. He calls us to uncommonness. Elders need to be uncommon in that sense. That goes into number 7, holding fast. That's the next one. Holding fast the faithful word, which is in accordance with the teaching, so that an elder will be able to both exhort in sound doctrine and refute those who contradict. And there's a pretty lengthy commentary below this here. You can read through at your leisure. But it's both the equipping and protecting, right? Like we have to have a sense of like, these are our biblical, scriptural, spiritual values. And we leverage that both to build up the body and to protect the body at the same time. And that's really just what an elder needs to be able to do. Is kind of know the core and then know how you can encourage that core more and more. And when others may be working against that core, you know how to be able to get in there and prevent that kind of damage too, right? And for every church, it's different, right? So for us, we have a little bit more of this err on the side of grace. Allow there to be more conversation on things that can be uncomfortable. Like that's kind of the space that we inhabit. And so you have to have elders that are comfortable in that, where there's other churches that are really tight and really particular in everything. And those elders have to be able to navigate that. So it's not one size fits all for every church, but it's just knowing that those elders in any given environment, depending on what the values are, they know how to protect it and they know how to promote it and they know how to disseminate it and also keep any kind of corruption from wrecking it. Like all of that has to be in there, and that's kind of what this quality is really all about. So any questions on that or those? Day's catching up with you, dude. I know, I feel you. Sam started his day very, very early, and he's been going like a crazy man ever since. So, yeah. I know. I feel you, man. I feel you. All right, top of page 112. We're moving in to 1 Peter chapter 5. Therefore, exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and witness to the sufferings of Christ, and a partaker also of the glory that is to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you. This goes back, I think, in some ways to the heart of a leader. Like, elders aren't members of a board, really, right? They're really more like they're carers of people. I think I'm making up English a little bit here, but they're carers of people, and they need to see it that way. So it's even less like we oversee an organization, And it's more like, no, we care for an organism made up of all of these components that are people, and we want to make sure we're leading from that perspective, right? So that's that heart of shepherding. Based on that, then you have number 9, exercising oversight, right? So what they are is an overseer, and what they do is oversight, which is they assess the spiritual and missional condition of the church, and then they lead, guard, and feed accordingly. So the only way I think an elder can have real oversight is that they're involved, and they always have their finger on the pulse of what's actually happening, right? So there's an authentic engagement so that they actually can then bring oversight because they know what's really happening. It's not just like come together as a board and then they just go do their own life and not really paying attention to the stuff at the church. They're just making decisions. That's not going to help. They have to be engaged at some level to be able to do that well. Number 10, not under compulsion, but willingly. So this is the same word Paul uses about giving. You know, like in other words, he doesn't want obligatory giving, and in the same way, Peter doesn't want compulsory pastoring. He wants people to be there because they want to be there and they want to do it, right? I think for lay or volunteer leaders, this is much more true. Like they're, quote, giving this extra time because they willingly want to do it. There's no other real factor probably in doing it. I think the greater risk is probably for people like me that are paid elders. I know there's been a few in my history and past and everything else where they're like, I don't like doing this. I don't want to keep doing it, but that's where I got my degrees, right? I got a bachelor's and a master's in divinity, and what am I going to do now? You know, because the joke is always like, if you get out of pastoring in your 40s and above, you're going to either sell houses, sell cars, or sell insurance. Like, you know, like you're going to go sell stuff, right? And so some are going, I don't want to go sell stuff, so I'll just stay, kind of thing. And so that would be out of compulsion, not willingly. That would be bad. And so I think the paid ones struggle with this probably more than the volunteer lay ones might struggle with this. And so it's important to note that. Number 11, according to the will of God. So they're shepherding with oversight, willingly, and according to the will of God, which means, again, it's not like we don't engineer a really cool thing and then execute it. Like our thing is always, this is why Jesus is our senior pastor. And so we're like, what does he want for his church? That's what we want to do. So this isn't about what we want to do, what we think would be cool, whatever else. I mean, we're always trying to bring our flavor to it and everything else, but we're still trying to stay within the constraints of Jesus has an agenda for his church and we want to pursue that. So this isn't about us making a really cool apparatus that everybody digs and it's super cool and gets away from the will of God. Not our heart. That's not what an elder is meant to do. So according to the will of God. Number 12, and not for sword to gain. This sounds familiar, but with eagerness. I do think now for the lay elder, where the risk would be here is somebody says, I want to be a leader in the church because I want to get connections, solicit clients, promote a reputation, land some contracts, whatever it is. I'm going to be a leader in a body of hundreds of people, and therefore I can use them as potential clients to what I do. I remember we dealt with this back in Spokane. We had a guy that was wanting to become an elder and was massively connected in Amway.
I've had that experience.
Yeah. And literally was like, and I'll have all these built-in people get connected. I'm like, no, you are not allowed to do that. And so, yeah. I also had an Amway guy try to pitch that to me once. He's like, dude, as a pastor, you could do this as a side gig, and you got a whole congregation that you could get below you. I'm like, you're insane. Like, this is the worst idea ever. I'm sure it sounds brilliant to you. Huh?
That goes with greed pretty good.
Yeah, right. I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. So, yeah. So not for sword to gain, but with eagerness, just for the joy of doing it. Number 13, nor yet as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples to the flock. Lording is forbidden. Example is to be maintained, right? So again, if you're in a rather authoritarian or legalistic church, that would be that, where they use dominance or fear or threat to shepherd, and that just creates a real toxic culture. I mean, if you look at the implosion of Mars Hill Church, that would be like the most public example of lording over living by example.
What happened to Mars Hill? I don't really know what happened.
Yeah, so I mean, it obviously had become very big, right? Had multiple campuses everywhere. Mark Driscoll was very well known in the evangelical world, but he was also a very dictatorial, authoritative leader, and they used a lot of fear and force to lead. I mean, it wasn't purely a Mark problem. I know, like, it kind of disseminated. Like, he had this kind of like, you shepherd with the stick, and you kind of beat the sheep in the direction you want them to go, and then the leaders below him kind of embrace that, and the leaders below them embrace that. So all the way down to, like, they would have community groups, and the leaders of the community groups in time were using the same kind of tactics to lead their small groups, even though they're just volunteers in the church running a group. There was just a lot of just like, are you being the kind of husband God wants you to be? And that there would be like this intimidation to make you that. Are you giving like you're supposed to give? Because if not, we're going to keep asking you, why aren't you giving? You need to give more. And so there was just a lot of that kind of control going on, and kind of threat was always there, and aggressiveness in a lot of it. But eventually you make that monster and it will start to eat itself. And that's what started to happen. So as Mark was really dominant, and his leaders were dominant, then in time the leaders tried to be dominant against Mark, and then Mark got more dominant with the leaders, and it kind of imploded itself. Because finally what they started to realize is, wait, this is a poison in here, and Mark generates this thing. We have to address that in Mark. We have to calm him down too, because he just keeps fueling this kind of attitude, and he wasn't going to have any part of being throttled.
There's a podcast series on Mars Hill.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That just really teaches how not to shepherd a church.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I wasn't involved in it. I know people that were, but from the outside looking in, you almost saw a pastor that was preaching with a strong conviction, but I think that was misinterpreted.
Mm-hmm.
So you could listen to some of his messages and think, wow, that's great, that's powerful, that's really convicting. But then that just speaks to, like, it wasn't quite just a conviction he was dealing with. It was that he was hard and fast and abusive almost with that.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting because we called them the Mars Hill refugees. Yeah. So when it imploded, we picked up a lot back in the day, and one of the guys became an elder here for a while. They moved to Texas, but he goes, Matt, it was so weird. He goes, a year after we left, it's like detox. And he goes, like, you don't even realize how much you're breathing in the air of this attitude. And he goes, I realized a year later when I was treating my wife more gently, how toxic it was. Like, he goes, because we were taught as men, you lead your homes and you lead your wives and all this stuff. And he goes, and certainly Mark, so when Mark and his wife Grace were engaged, because it comes out in one of his books, she ended up having like an affair during their engagement. And then after they got married, she told him. And like, he kind of throws her under the bus in the book, because it was on Real Marriage was the book. And he kind of brings it up and that kind of thing. But I think there was almost like, this is why women need strong men, because they will do stupid stuff like wander. And so that tone was always there, like, you're leading your wife, but it was almost like through subjugation a little bit. Like, there was this tone in there, a hint of it. And so, like, Eric was like, dude, it was so weird. Like, a year later, my wife and I were talking, and she's like, you treat me more gentle now. And he goes, yeah, because I realized that I was supposed to treat you more gentle, but we were in a world that was like, women are more easily deceived. Women just can stray in a lot of ways. Women got to be a little bit more controlled, so to speak. And so, yeah, it was really wild. And Eric goes, but it's weird when you're in it, it all makes so much sense, so to speak. It's like, I mean, he wasn't going to say that Mars Hill was a cult, and I'm not going to say that either, but it was almost like those things that cults can do, it was on a lower level of the same thing, and it becomes a self-feeding, generating thing. And so if a bunch of guys are holding each other accountable to leading their homes well, but the tone is, You got to keep your wife kind of controlled to lead well. And if some guy's wife is not being controlled enough, well, he's not leading well, so then he feels the pressure. And he goes, dude, it was super weird, you know. And I said, Marshall was really good at getting people to give. Why was that? He goes, because you were guilted into it. Because I think he was on a track to become an elder at one of their campuses. And he goes, yeah. He goes, they would call you. Like, hey, notice you haven't given lately, you know. Oh yeah, I lost a job, whatever else, you know. Okay, well, that's cool. So let's see if we can help you with that. But you still need to give something, you know, even if you're on, you know, you're getting money from family or you're, you know, whatever you're doing. God still calls you to give something, you know. So it's just always ever present, man. So yeah, it's pretty wild. Very different model, but because they were so successful and Mark was so well known, everyone went like, well, of course. And he's in Seattle and he's saying it like it is. Like he's saying some pretty tough stuff for a liberal state. And so I think all the more it kind of like just kind of made it like celebrated because, hey man, you've got thousands and thousands of people coming to a church in the Pacific Northwest. You must be doing it all right, you know? And that was kind of the thing. And Mark's a great communicator. I mean, he's down in Phoenix now and I think he's way harsher now. Oh yeah, he's way harsher now. And packed church, because he's a really good communicator, you know. I think he's a better communicator now.
My mom still listens to his sermons.
Oh really? Yeah. No, he's a better communicator, but he was on Charlie Kirk's podcast. Charlie Kirk is a political pundit. Very conservative. He's doing a lot of things on college campuses for conservative causes. So he had Mark on his podcast, and Mark started like a little brand thing. Instead of what would Jesus do, it was what would Elijah do. And Elijah's like, he would slit the throats of 450 prophets of Baal is what he would do. He goes, what we need to do today is slit the throats of 450 denominational leaders for being beta males that won't stand up for what men really need to be. I mean, he's like that, you know. You're just like, Mark is swinging with both hands, man. And so he was making hats, what would Elijah do? And I'm like, I'm sticking with the what would Jesus do thing, Mark. I don't know what to tell you, man. So, yeah, it's pretty wild. But it's how it works sometimes. Where did we leave off? Deacons, nice. All right, what do we got here? Let's see how fast we can go, because I know we're not going to quite finish, but we'll see what we do. So deacons likewise must be. Under deacons, deacons are not stepping stones to eldership, right? We don't go like, hey, become a deacon, and then eventually you become an elder. They're two different things with different function. And so, you know, we see these in our church at least as serving aids to the elders. So I think we've talked about that before, but hey, when we have an area that's important enough that needs a leader, but it doesn't have to be an elder, we'll have it be a deacon. And we'll get into in a minute, but we have here both men and women are deacons at Redemption Church. And it's because of the way Paul kind of puts together the qualities of a deacon in 1 Timothy 3. So first we'll start with the moral qualities. It says they must be, in 3:8b, men of dignity, is what it says, dignity. And it's weird because actually in Greek the word man is not there. So the NASB says men of dignity in Greek, does not say men. We add that because of the fact that women come up later, right? So they just made an editorial decision there. But dignity just means one who's worthy of respect, you know? So it means noble or esteemed. Majestic is actually one of the things. And so, again, I think we understand we meet a person that has dignity and we know of people that don't. We kind of know the difference. When it comes to deacons, it's got to be there. Number 2, not double-tongued or two-worded is literally what it means in Greek. And nobody quite knows what the compound is directly getting at. And so it could be repeating what others have said, which is gossip, saying one thing and meaning another, which is insincerity, telling a person one thing and another person another thing, which is manipulation, or speaking out of both sides of our mouth, which is deceit. No matter what one of those categories, all of those categories combined makes for double tongue. And again, just in the storytelling side of it, we had an elder here at Redemption, now probably 12 years ago, roughly. So in the first year and a half or whatever else. And we had a worship pastor at the time, awesome dude, loved him, everything else. But he was just kind of stuck, right? And so I went to the board and said, I think I need to swap out and find somebody new in this position. And this one particular elder was like, I agree with you. I went to every elder individually. I agree with you 100%. Yep, got to do that. We all agreed on the consensus, so we decided to go ahead and make the change and let him go. And then that's how we ended up with Trent eventually. But that first elder that totally supported me, we were then calling strategic people in the church when we announced before we announced that Ryan was going to be moving on. We're like, hey, we know there's people really close to Ryan. We want to call them personally as elders and just be like, hey, just to let you know, This one elder, the one that was telling me like, dude, totally support you. When he would talk to people that were not happy about the decision, he was like, yeah, me neither. I wasn't super supportive of it. And so the double-tongued thing just bit me in the butt, because I'm like, dude, you told me you 100% agree with me. You're telling other people you didn't agree with the board, but you went along with it anyway. I'm like, you're not helping. So yeah, that was a rough one. And he had a little bit of that reputation as time went on. We called it the chameleon effect, So I think he was trying to be sincere with anybody in front of him, but at the cost of accuracy or honesty. So I think he wanted to please anybody right in front of him, and doesn't that help when you have 100% unanimity and decision making, and then somebody says this here, but then something opposite there? Does not help an elder board at all. So yeah, but clearly they're not here anymore. So that all settled out great in the end. So yeah, that was kind of a weird one. So not double tongue, and that was an elder. This is of a deacon, but applies to both. Of course, not addicted to much wine, not fond of sordid gain. Those are repeats from what we saw with elders, and I was just applied to deacons. After this, the spiritual qualities of a deacon. Number one, holding to the mystery of faith with a clear conscience. I love the fact that it's mystery. So, again, I like the fact that even Paul acknowledges, like, hey, man, there's some stuff we don't know. It's a mystery of faith. But whatever that mystery it is, you still hold it with a clear conscience. On this, it doesn't mean that so much that a deacon has to have the aptitude of teaching the faith as much as they have an inner disposition of still holding to it. And they really genuinely, authentically believe it in their being. Number two, they must also be tested, right? They must first be tested and then let them serve as deacons if they are above or beyond reproach. And this one's helpful, right? Like, again, it's like faithful in little, faithful in much. And especially in their world, there may have been the reality that deacons were given money to allocate it to the needs of the poor or to allocate it to the needs of the widows or whatever it is. And so you would be really tempted when you're handed cash, to maybe little for you and little for others or whatever it is. And so there was just this real thoughtful thing of, no, they got to be tested first. They got to prove themselves before they're put into that position, because they may have some responsibilities that require that, hey, we vetted this out a little bit. So that's kind of the spirit behind that. Number three, for those who have served well as deacons, obtain for themselves a high standing and great confidence in the faith that is in Christ Jesus. And so, again, they have a good reputation in the community and a deepening conscience of faith, right? That's kind of that whole thing that's in there right there. And so, again, it's kind of nice that he's saying, in serving well, it's part of the way that we know they serve well is that it's seen that they serve well, that others can note that too. Like, that person is a really quality person. They really done a lot of stuff. And then that gives them great confidence as well in this process of it all. So that's kind of the spirit behind number three. Now we're on to page 16, domestic qualities. Some of these are repeats again from elders, just apply to deacons. So again, a deacon must be the husband of one wife and have good management of their children and their own household. Again, it's already been stated before, so we're just kind of paralleling it a little bit. Nothing unique to bring to that, just that it applies to both elders and deacons. Next, we get into the female deacon qualities, right? Because it says, number one, women must likewise be. And then there's this big commentary below that right there. And again, I won't deep dive into all of that. Again, a lot of this is just commentary that we've written to kind of articulate these different things. But there's all this Greek discussion about, is this women or wives? Is it the wives of deacons that he's talking about, or is he talking about women deacons? It's a big, giant debate. We landed on the idea that it's just the women. It doesn't have to be like deacons' wives in particular have to have these qualities when there was not qualities of the wives of elders. We think that this is describing the office of female deacons, right? So that's kind of the place that we as a church landed on all of that. And so you can, if you want to read that little ditty on, what's being really discussed there from a grammatical perspective.
Well, wouldn't they hold to the same standard as one of the men, basically?
Well, the part of weirdly enough, I think what Paul does is I think if we said, Paul, list every quality of an elder that you could conceive of, it would be a lot longer than the list that we have. I think he was thinking about Timothy in Ephesus and some of the propensities of the men there. And in the same way, when he writes about now women deacons, he's going to highlight certain things that may have been more commonly problems in Ephesus for women, where maybe in another place it would have been a different list of things. So it's not exhaustive list. And so therefore, the qualities of women deacons and men deacons, some of them are different. I think just because Paul was like, that's what they struggle with there. You know what I mean? You could say, like, I remember when Trent came from LA back up to the Pacific Northwest, and we were talking about, like, hey, what was the biggest struggle in the church down there? And he goes, oh, vanity. Like the need to look and stay young forever, because it was LA, Hollywood adjacent. And he goes, like, it was all consuming all the time. He goes, we're here. It's just not that. So I think, if Paul were writing to an LA church, he might write about vanity. We're writing to someplace here, it might be like, the Seattle chill, that nobody's truly friendly, or what, you know what I mean? Like, he might deal with that, And so I think it's customized to the circumstance in that sense. So that's why there's going to be a little bit difference between the men and women. It was probably different problems that they were dealing with or whatever else. And so let's see, let me go back and look. I don't think I skipped anything. We did what am I missing? Oh, thank you for that. So dignified. They must be dignified. A noble, esteemed, and majestic character that maintains a powerful influence among those who are being served, right? So if you're undignified, probably not a lot of influence there, right? And so in this sense, they have to have a sense of being dignified. And again, within the culture of Ephesus, it's interesting because even when Paul starts to write to Timothy about, like, the women and men in corporate worship, he's saying, hey, the women are doing this really ornate hair and doing all of this jewelry and everything else. And it almost was like flaunting a kind of thing that wasn't dignified. So he's like, got to get that settled down a little bit. Maybe in another environment it'd be fine. But in Ephesus, it created some kind of, disruption in the corporate worship. So Paul was customizing to the problems there, as much as there was men that needed to do things different than they were doing, and he was customizing to that. So I think this dignified might be revolving around some of those problems of just pecking order or caste system a little bit, and that they need to be dignified to all, not just favoring to some. Number 3, not malicious gossips. Paul addresses this also in 1 Timothy 5, right, with women in particular. Like, it seems that in the Ephesian context, there was some busybodies, there was some things going on, and he has to bring it up more than once. And so for the female deacons, he's like, man, this is a little bit more prevalent with the ladies of Ephesus and the Ephesian church. You got to make sure your female deacons are not falling into that trap. Because the widows were starting to do it, and there were some other things that kind of come up later in that particular letter. And so that's just another one of those things. Aside from being not gossips, they must be temperate, right? Which again is a word we came up with before, not holding to wine. It's that idea of, again, having objectivity, sober-mindedness in what they do. Number 5, faithful in all things. So consistently dependable, completely reliable. That's just that idea of, like, whatever's before them, they're going to be faithful in fulfilling that task and doing that thing. And so that's just another one of their final unique qualities. And we did it! Somehow we did it. That was a push. So, yeah, right? And I know it's a little methodical just to be looking at all of those qualities, but, we also find it really good to, like, do that. And then when a person goes through their examination, so to speak, of they're just asking themselves, is this me? They kind of know what to measure it against, too, And so, I reiterate that all of those qualities, they don't have to be 100% true in every person, but they generally have to be true, And some of those I'm going to be stronger in, and some of those I'm going to be weaker in, but generally I still need to be above average on all of those things. So again, I joke about the hospitality thing. If left to my own devices, I probably wouldn't be as hospitable as I am. So it's probably not one of my stronger traits. Luckily, I have people around me that care about that enough, and I value it in my head, right? It's just knowing my introverted disposition. By the end of that night or that time, my batteries will be at -5, or whatever it is. Like, that'll be true. But then other qualities are probably stronger in my world, and everything hopefully balances out as above average then. So that's kind of the way we treat it, because not all elders are built the same, not all deacons are built the same, and that's good, for sure. So, yeah. So any questions?
I am currently married or living with someone.
Yeah, that would be a question.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you?
Currently married and living.
That could be worded probably better.
So you're saying that they could be not married and living with somebody?
There, you might have a person that would do that, and then we go, that's
I'm a widow, but I have a son who lives with me.
There you go.
nice. Okay. We'll use a certain level of independent discretion on how you want to assess those things. So, yeah, that's perfect. So, well, thank you, everybody. I won't hold you up any longer than I've held you up already. So, we'll be back at it in 2 weeks. I think that one is on spiritual disciplines. So, we're going to start migrating now toward things like spiritual disciplines, shepherding, counseling, teaching. So we start to get into like practicalities on some things here. So, yeah. So we're transitioning away to the next things. Cool.
I got a question with the youth director position.
Yeah. Do you want it? Do you want it?
No.
Do you want it? Do you want it?
My older brother might.
Really? Because I would.
Candidates that sounded promising, so I was like, all right.
No. Okay, I know I'm going to say this, and there's a camera in front of me. I know I'm saying this in this
I'm
room.
going to turn it off.
I can edit it out. I personally can't say I'm thrilled about our two candidates right now. They're not bad. They each have a pro and a con, right? But I would more than welcome any other potential person that wants to put their hat in the ring, because I think we're going to be doing some Zoom calls with both of the candidates next Monday, and then from there kind of figure out, do we bring them in to interact with the youth and everything else. One's kind of local up in Arlington, and then the other's down in the Phoenix area, I think it is. But I can't say that I'm like, woohoo! So yes, if he is interested, I would love to get
He's at least appeasing me.
a bead on that, because it is not closed yet.
Yeah, he lives in Lake Stevens and they go to church in Snohomish, but he has a heart for ministry and leads often.
Yeah. Yes. I would love to see his stuff. Yeah. Or send it to Scott. Either Scott's kind of the point person on this, but
Well, he's asking me like, what's the name of your church? What are the details? Full-time, part-time?
details full-time. Salary range somewhere in the 80s.
Gosh,
So-
I think I'll come to that.
Yeah. Wow. There's caveats in that, I'm sure, but yeah, it's basically, yeah. So, yeah. So there you go. I'd love to be excited about. Okay, I'd love to be excited about it, because, like I said, these are good guys. One guy, the local guy, would be, in my mind, so far at least from what I've seen, he would love that group, and it probably wouldn't go much further than that group. Like he would love every kid individually really, really well. The other guy, I think, could grow that group, right? But he has other sets of things where I'm like, and he'll probably bounce in 2 years, or something like that, And so I'm just like, I don't have enough data on both these guys yet, but we've done a collective Zoom call with each of them. We had parents, students, leaders, elders all in it. So
I can send you a link to some of the sermons if you're curious.
perfect. I'm already super excited. Just there's another potential option out there. Yeah. And then if he is interested, we have a preliminary like, hey, fill this out or whatever it is. So yeah, that'd be cool. Look at that. I swear, man, if that happened and I fell in love, you'd be making my world, man. Cause Scott's like, dude, I'm done in June. Like, like he's like, I'm finishing in June, man. We better get this figured out.
I
So
don't know how they feel about the distance, but it's not too bad with Stevens.
no, it's not terrible, especially on Sundays, man. Yeah, that's the one day of the week that the traffic level is a little different.
First thing in the morning.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, yep. So it's kind of like downtown Seattle. I can get from church to a Seahawks game within 45 minutes because it's Seattle on a Sunday. So, all right, kids, that's it. Yeah, I finally got my yard under control, and now, because I'm a dummy, when they built the house, they did the initial taping, but now I'm going to go ahead and finish up the tape job, sand it, paint it, yeah, for the garage, and then something I've wanted a long time, and I'm finally just going to go ahead and do it. You know those really nice floors you can have in a garage?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Decadent. Huh?
The squishy foam.
No, this is more like, it's not the epoxy stuff, but it's something else. So it's like, it has like the flake and then shiny and
It's great.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
It has the black
You
flakes
have
and
a
stuff.
choice of.
And go-
yeah, you got options. You got
Yeah,
options.
yeah.
A
I've
friend of
seen
mine
it.
had it, and I was like, what is this magic?
Yeah.
You know? And so I got a buddy of mine that installs
Makes it a
them.
lot easier to
And
clean.
so he's like, dude, I'll totally help you put it in if you want. So
Well, it's like a.
Yeah, I want to do the same thing, but my wife goes, if we're thinking about moving, we don't want to go to that expense.
that's true. Because if I didn't have this buddy of mine that does it, it would just help me do it. I'm like, I don't think I'd do it. Because even as it is, just to buy the supplies and all that stuff is still.
Upscale look.
I think when it's all said and done, it probably costs
Yeah,
about
I guess
care
I'd
about
have,
that in your garage.
I guess I'd have to see it to
Yeah.
understand what we're talking about, 'cause I have no concept.
You
Think
can go
about
online and
carpet
look it up,
in my garage.
garage floor surfaces. and
Dude,
see
perfect.
what options.
Oh, nice.